to another episode of Blueprint Matters. Today we have another very exciting guest, Sonia, who is the head of founder experience at BackedVC and Forbes 30under30, as well as she was a part of funding team at entrepreneurship. Welcome. We're very glad to have you here today.
Super excited to be here.
Yeah, Kyle, do you want to tell us a bit about
Yeah, so basically Sonia and I met on a panel chat on entrepreneurship through Millie Group. And by the way, I definitely recommend you follow Millie Group or check them out. They also give a lot of good tips for people looking to get into good companies and internships and universities and whatnot, so check them out. But yeah, we had a really good chat and Sonia had some amazing tips, and I know she'll be very modest to tell you that she doesn't know enough, but she really does, and we're very excited to host her, so we're really happy to have a chat, and maybe we can start with her just telling us a bit about her background, maybe, and take it from there.
Yeah, so my background, so I did law at university, like you as well, and I actually really loved my degree, but I guess like in terms of decision-making process, I didn't really know what to study, and so through process of elimination I was like, okay, law is relatively broad and will set me up for whatever I want to do next. And then it just so happened that I made friends with someone who dropped out of his computer science degree and joined EF to build a company when EF was really, really tiny. And so that's how I was exposed to the world of startups, tech, VC. And I mean, it's really hard for me to assess how much times have changed now, but I think like when you're studying law, it was such a bubble. Like I literally thought that very, I don't know, standard careers were the only thing that one can pursue. And so, yeah, post-law, joined EF, still continued my legal studies on the side, part-time, and was with EF for 4.5 years.
Wow.
Everything that I learned about talent investing, founding, entrepreneurship was through Entrepreneur First. And then I, almost 2 years ago now, joined Backed to go a little bit later stage, supporting founders post-seed investment to Series A.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. How do you find your law background? Is it helpful for you throughout your career so far?
In all honesty, no.
What about you, Anastasia? Has it been useful for you?
Yeah, well, I have a similar background. I studied law and then I jumped to software engineering, so no as well. But
don't do law degrees is the key. Yeah.
Helpful, I think, in general life, it's definitely helpful. When you sign something, you can read the documents and do that stuff. But obviously. I would have done something else.
The bit that I actually probably enjoyed the most out of my law degree, which I think is also the most helpful, is jurisprudence, which is like legal philosophy. And I actually think the one thing that I wish I would have done more at university in general is philosophy, just because it's one of those subjects that is actually really difficult to study without any sort of guidance, but actually teaches you a lot of like first principles thinking.
Logic as well.
So in that sense, I think like the jurisprudence, like breaking things down, is probably the most useful bit from my law degree. And then the stuff that I enjoyed the most is like totally unrelated, like criminal stuff I loved. It's like, totally unrelated.
If you had a time machine, what would you study now from like your experience that you have now instead of law?
Instead of law. I mean, okay, to be honest, I probably would have picked law again, but let's say if I can't pick law, what would I have studied? Maybe philosophy. Like, I think I would have really loved to do it, although I also think it's possibly one of the most difficult subjects to study.
It's very broad.
Yeah, but I think maybe philosophy actually.
So would you say you'd pick philosophy over like a science or engineering degree, like computer science or things like that?
Yeah, I think so. I'm incredibly sociable, and so I think pursuing like engineering or computer science, I think for me always seemed like relatively siloed work. It's actually so interesting. Like if you look at the history of computer science, and obviously like the fact that not very many women pursue it is like topic of conversation wherever you look. But there's like this cutoff point, and I don't know when it happened, but there was like almost 50-50 split up until the moment where computer science then shifted to actually programming and computers, and that's when there was a huge drop off. So I think in terms of like the actual theory and studies and like the human element, it was still like 50-50 split, and then the minute that it became a little bit more siloed and just focused on machines, there was like a huge drop off.
I guess there are courses out there that would link the two. Like the course I did in my bachelor's did that. It was like I took psychology and philosophy, but I also took computer science.
Yeah.
And then it was like the bridge between the two. So maybe something like that could be pretty interesting for people to look into.
It's actually so fun. Like I loved maths at school. Like I really, really loved it. But if I'm being totally honest, I don't think my maths would have ever been good enough to pursue it at university. And so that's like another limiting factor. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you spoke about how you met one of the co-founders of EF at university, right?
No. So my friend had dropped out of computer science to join an EF program to build a company, and then he connected me to one of the co-founders.
Amazing. And then you just joined and.
Yeah, I mean the initial ask was just for me to maybe join a portfolio company, but EF hardly had any portfolio companies, and it was such early days. And instead of that, I then connected to Zoe, who is leading talent for EF, and ended up joining her team, learning a ton, and just like figuring out what makes good founders, as in what founders look like before they're founders, how do you identify them, how do you build up a database and like manage to incorporate pattern recognition without limiting the fact that not everyone looks the same and behaves the same, and outliers will probably never match the data, but actually like if you do have so many people who go through the program, there is a lot you can learn.
Some similar traits.
Yeah.
So actually maybe that's a really good thing to discuss. Like what, in your experience, have you identified as being founder potential?
A great question, and I was actually thinking about it today, not even related to like our conversation. Clearly, it's like what I think about all the time. But I think the best founders realize that actually everything that exists is made up, and so you don't need to follow any norms or any rules, and you can create the future that you want to live in. And I think that's one of the things that is actually really difficult to do when you go through like a normal education system and you think that these are like all the things that you need to hit to like get to the next stage, and then like you apply to the next phase of your life and then you hit those things and etc. And I think the best entrepreneurs just realize that actually it's all made up. Like everything that exists is just like conventions and norms that we've sort of subscribed to and agreed to, and they don't follow the rules. And I think that's the main one. Obviously, growth mindset is something that people talk about a lot. I think you have to have a growth mindset to be a good founder, as in you will constantly hit walls and receive feedback that is like difficult, or will shift your perspectives and what you decide to pursue.
It's interesting what you said about founders having that sort of seeing through the perception of things, or how things are set out, the social structures.
Yeah.
Because I guess that is sort of what it takes, because those people generally are the ones who set these social structures.
Yeah.
People in business or politics, they create those structures. So if people can see through them, then it gives them an opportunity to evolve those structures or create new ones. So that's a really interesting point, and not something you really hear. Usually you hear about growth mindset, but I've never heard that before. So
I think the best entrepreneurs just don't follow rules. It's actually so funny. This is like, I don't even know if this is like true, but when we were doing a lot of like talent drives for EF, there was this notion that we used to rehearse a lot of dinners, just to like, I don't know, we identified a lot of people that we thought had potential, take them out for dinner, and the people that then ended up performing the best, a lot of the time, there was this notion that they would order off the menu, but in a literal sense, as in we would run these dinners and you would have a set menus and we would like pre-agree with the restaurant, and the bill would come and there would always be a handful of people that like never had anything from the set menu and somehow managed to negotiate with the waiters to like have something totally different, and that was like, okay, these people clearly just like do what they want.
I think that makes sense, because to be a founder, you probably have to operate outside of the boundaries. You have to connect dots that aren't connected on a traditional pathway. So I think it is people who draw outside of the lines. So that's a good point.
Yeah, for sure.
So during your legal practice course, when was the moment when you decided that you are not pursuing that career, you're definitely doing something else? Like, when was that point that you did decide?
So I think 2 points. One, when I joined EF, so that was right after my undergraduate studies. But I was still pursuing a legal practice course part-time. But then I think by then my part-time studies took 2 years. So by the time that I was done with those, I like knew that I wasn't going to apply for a training contract or pursue law. I think I did it partly to like finish my studies and to have an equivalent of a master's, but also to like keep doors and options open. But it's so funny, like I can't imagine being a lawyer. Like I feel like I get to do one of the best jobs in the world, just like hanging out with smart people that are building stuff from nothing. And I see my friends that did pursue law, and it's so far, so far removed from like my desires, ambitions, what I would enjoy, etc.
So then you joined Entrepreneur First, and what have you been doing there?
So I focused on talent. So one, elevating entrepreneurship on par with academia and industry, and just like trying to make it a career path that more people pursued. Just because I think there's obviously been such a shift over the past 10 years, 15 years, or however long. But it really wasn't so common to have people build startups, and I still actually think it's one of the most difficult career paths for people to pursue. So I don't think the narrative around everyone should at least give it a go is particularly helpful, because I don't think that's true. I think you really need to dedicate your whole life to building a company, and you need to factor in that you won't have work-life balance, and you'll have to put everything else on pause, and the emotional roller coaster is super intense, and it's actually quite lonely as well. But I mean, I was trying to elevate entrepreneurship to at least make sure that the smartest and most ambitious people at least consider whether it's something that they would want to pursue or do. So a lot of recruiting for cohorts, but recruiting for cohorts is obviously very different in that it's not a job, and it's not, you're essentially trying to identify outliers before they may have even considered pursuing entrepreneurship.
And with all that extensive background, have you ever considered starting your own thing yourself, like being an entrepreneur yourself?
Yes, but not VC backed. So it is ironic given that I work in VC, and a lot of people think that VC is, I don't know, evil, let's say. I'm actually a huge proponent of VCs, and I think it gives people opportunities to build stuff that is loss making, as in you can literally take someone else's money, burn through it all, and if it doesn't work out, you'll never be indebted. And you can't get a bank loan to build something where you're not making profit or don't have transaction histories, etc. So I think eventually I would probably want to start a business, but not in a global sense, not a VC-backed business. I would probably pursue coaching. So I started coaching in the past year and a bit. I did coaching qualifications, but it's so different to the founders that I actually work with. So yes, but a regular business.
So I'm interested about you said that when you were at EF you were doing more pre-seed, or it was it was pre-anything. and now at Backed you focused on post-seed. So I'm interested in sort of the differences between those two experiences, and maybe a bit more about what you're doing at Backed at the moment.
Yeah, so at Backed I've built an 18-month program, roughly 18 months, to get our companies from seed to Series A. And it's a mix of all the foundations that I think are important for founders in a way that is as programmatic as possible, given that we're a generalist fund, so it's everything from biotech to gaming to consumer. And it's a mix of a lot of founder and people development and infrastructure, a little bit of brand and media, a little bit of finance, a little bit of fundraising. Last quarter I was just working on go-to-market support, so it's a really, really big blend. In terms of the differences, it's so funny because when at EF everyone always spoke about how early EF is, and it's pre-team, pre-idea, but I didn't actually realise until I then realised how early seed still is. So when you make bets at seed, you really are backing founders on potential, on the promise that they can deliver on what they want to deliver, that what they want to deliver on actually makes sense for someone to pursue. So it is still super, super early, but I think that's the phase that I am most both energized by, interested in, and I think the one where I can actually bring the most value. Maybe after this I'll go down A, B, C. It's later stage companies.
So I know I was listening back there, right? And those of you guys were talking about sort of how do you find founders, right? So I guess can you speak first a little bit how EF even finds people for these cohort sessions, these dinners, etc.?
Yeah, good question.
So I don't know about process now. I have been out of it for over 2 years, but things have definitely shifted a lot in that I think EF now has a relatively good presence, at least in the European startup
Yeah.
ecosystem. So there's
Sure.
actually like a lot of inbound applications or people that just know about it, want to pursue it. But in the early days, you have to be super, super creative, both in terms of partnerships, university partnerships, which I know is somewhat limiting in that it means that you can only, it's like an absolute measure of achievement as opposed to relative. And I actually think some of the most interesting individuals will have achieved a lot relative to where they started, as opposed to have had a very easy life where they had a great education, upbringing, ended up going to Oxford or Cambridge, etc. And then they're...
So that's actually really interesting, right? Because you're sort of looking for people who are like almost like diamonds in the rough, right?
Yeah.
And I guess like when you're actively seeking people out, if they've never considered like entrepreneurship, how do you make sure they have sort of that spark that you mentioned before of like
or the drive,
or
the desire,
or the ability to like just
Yeah.
break rules, right?
Yeah.
If they spend their entire life like in a corporation or Oxford, Cambridge,
Academia,
or whatever,
Yeah.
how do you know they're willing to create the risk?
I mean, okay, how do you find diamonds in the rough? I think a lot of the time, people that will go on to achieve great things sometimes have, or like in most cases, have already done things that are far beyond what their peers have achieved.
Yeah.
And so there's various creative ways that you can even like source people online where you look for like youngest ever or competition winners, prize winners, people that have received various awards for their achievements. And even if it's in like different sectors and industries, sometimes the fact that they've gone above and beyond translates into something totally different, like entrepreneurship.
So it's a sense of initiative almost.
Yeah, like initiative, etc. Yeah, it's actually quite interesting because we spoke about age a lot at EF as well, and I guess like age in general seems to come up in startups and VC. To what extent should funds be funding like younger individuals versus older? Are you more likely to achieve more when you're younger versus when you're older? I don't actually know what the answer is statistically. At EF there was always a narrative that it's a lot easier to be amongst the top 10% of a younger age group than the top 10% of an older age group, just because by the time that you're older, you're competing with, I don't know, billionaires or other founders like Elon Musk, whoever, and it's so much harder to be in the top 10%. But then you also look at like huge companies that were started by people in their 50s, 60s. I don't know if that's like an easy formula to say.
I think that's something borrowed from the US, because US is almost about like achievements over age, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of that culture of you need to be young and first.
Yeah. But like, is it the founder of Impossible who started it like at the age of 60, Impossible Meats and stuff? So I mean, there is no very clear cutoff.
I think statistically, and don't quote me on it, but I think most founders globally are 50, around about 50.
Yeah.
So, but that's like global average.
But I think one of the things like age, if you're older, like people tend to be less creative. But at the same time, if you look at like academics, right?
Yeah.
If they start a new field where they don't have any experience, they're actually just as creative as someone who's like 25.
Yeah. But I guess this is the narrative, right? Like one of the biggest benefits of being young is that you don't know what you don't know. And so maybe like the whole risk-taking element or pursuing things and creating stuff that everyone else might think shouldn't exist or can't exist. You like don't actually know all the limitations, and so you just like go for it, and it turns out you can do it.
That's true. I think I read something where Branson wrote an article about creative naivety. And it was exactly in reference to that, and that's why he was also encouraging younger people to.
And I think that takes off with age. Like, even, and I don't like, I'm not a particular risk taker. I'm not like more creative than the average person, I don't think. But even for me, I can probably sense the fact that actually, like, my worldview is solidifying year on year, and it's like terrifying.
It's scary. You're like, am I just trapped in this like view forever, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's interesting about what I was saying about the average founder age. Even though it's older, most of those founders actually found companies similar to the ones they're currently in, or with one of their vendors or suppliers or something like that. Whereas I think younger founders potentially have more like ability to start something that's completely different.
Although I do think actually like focusing on any averages in entrepreneurship is incredibly broad.
That's a good point.
So people
you want
like
to be
talk about
that
statistics.
outlier, right?
People talk about statistics and it's like, okay, average round size, average age, average like journey length, etc. None of that stuff actually means anything because for the ones that do really well, they'll be so different.
Yeah, that's true.
I think there's an effect across cultures as well, right? Like, I think obviously like a lot of your experiences in Europe and the UK. And do you think compared to, let's say, like Asian markets or North American markets, like what are the advantages or disadvantages of being in Europe, right?
Yeah.
Comparatively.
I mean, so I can probably speak to the differences between Europe and the US more so than Europe and Asia, just because I have less exposure to the Asian market. There's always this narrative that in Europe we're like further behind than the US by like 10 years or so. I think there are definitely, the US takes more risks, gets companies funded a lot quicker, but there has been a huge shift, especially because of COVID, where actually a lot of US funds are now investing in the UK and Europe. And I think that has actually propelled funds here to act a lot quicker as well and come to like have better internal processes to come to decisions quicker, because otherwise in a competitive market you just can't compete. If we take 6 weeks to come to a decision and like a US fund will do a deal in like a week,
you need to get term sheets faster now, right?
But okay, in terms of like benefits of Europe, incredible talent. Like I think the quality of talent in the UK and Europe is on par with the US, and a lot of the times a lot more affordable as well. So I think like in terms of
you're saying that Europeans are underpaid,
or Americans are underpaid.
You know what?
But I think there is incredible talent. It'll be interesting to see how things change post Brexit actually, because some of our companies that are hiring at the moment, I think for them hiring talent from Europe, continental Europe, is almost as cumbersome as hiring someone from the US. And so actually then the toss is like a very different calculation, right? Like, do you want to go through the whole process of like granting someone a visa, etc., from continental Europe versus from Stanford? I mean, I don't know. So it'll be an interesting shift.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, but I think culturally, what I find really interesting, having like grown up in the US and now lived in London for 3 years, is the sense of like focus on process and stability in Europe, right? And it comes from that like cultural like heritage of we sort of have what we want and we just want to improve the quality of life. Whereas America, in the sense of like you're always hungry, right? So not even just like I guess how the VC process works, but the founders coming in have very different mindsets.
Yeah, it's actually just thinking of like ambition. I think ambition still probably tends to be a lot larger in the US than founders here, or maybe just the way they talk about that ambition. So it's very difficult for me to actually quantify whether ambition levels genuinely are greater, but like the way you talk about it, the narrative is very, very different. So that was one of the things I wanted to say, but I actually wanted to share something else, but I've now forgotten in terms of I know actually, like one of them, and not to be too negative about the ecosystem here, but I think one of the biggest noticeable differences is that everyone in the US is very willing and open to support each other. And I think here there's more competition, more competition like the cagey sense of like, like if I help someone else, that actually detracts from like the stuff that I can, almost like a zero-sum game.
That's so true. I think in the US you're definitely experiencing people will make introductions, they will put people in touch, they're needing
mindset.
It's a win-win mindset, like we're all winning, it's like collaboration. That's what I found, like, and the competition that I've experienced in that area has been more sort of like to drive each other rather than it's like a negative, like if they get like you said, zero-sum games.
But it's interesting, I don't know if it's cultural or whether the fact that the US has had a lot more successes, and so actually like if you're in an environment where whoever you're chatting to might potentially be successful, you are somewhat incentivized to almost support them, or I think it's either that or maybe it's cultural. But let's hope it's the successes and then the UK will catch up as well.
I think on the positive side though, there's a much greater focus on sustainability around, I think like thinking about how do I build a company or business that's maybe sustainable from a climate perspective, from a work-life perspective, etc. Right? And I think that's our human element is definitely missing on their side of the pond.
Missing in the US?
With like how many days leave? Like 15 days leave?
0 days leave.
0 days leave,
Oh no, it's unlimited, but you're
unlimited, you take less.
But that's a question though, right? Can you build sustainable businesses while still competing with everyone who doesn't care about that, right?
I mean, I think it's hard. Like, if I'm being super, super honest, I think startups just require so many hours, and so, I think it's really hard to build a globally significant business and have great work-life balance. I think it's,
Something has to compromise.
Yeah.
That's
why I don't think founding is for everyone, because you do have to make a lot of sacrifices to actually like build big businesses.
And that could tie into why like the US has more startups than Europe, is because of that culture, that work ethic, whereas maybe in Europe it's better to, when the processes are set up, people can execute better. I was curious about, so this is shifting topics a little bit, but I was curious about CEO assessment, which is something that you're well versed in. What sort of criteria does that involve, and what things do you look at?
Yeah, it's a great question, because actually I think my perspective on this has shifted quite a bit since joining a fund that invests in Z, because we used to talk about CEO assessments at EF, but actually I think founders and CEOs are very different personalities potentially, and so what you're really looking for at EF is founder potential or founders, but very many of them don't necessarily transition to CEOs, which probably comes like post, I don't know, Series B, Series C, where the skill set is quite different. So I think for founders, you really need to have go-getters that can create stuff from nothing and are very creative, are great at selling. Like, you have to be great at selling as a founder to be able to raise, to be able to hire, to be able to sell people on something that doesn't exist. And so therefore, you need to convince people that something that has never existed to date should exist, and it's crazy that it's not existed so far. Whereas I think as a CEO, there's like slightly different leadership traits where
better grow.
Yeah, exactly. You need to like be better at, I don't know, people management and leadership in ways that maybe as a founder you don't necessarily need to be. Some founders do become great CEOs, but it's not a given that all founders will become great
like a
CEOs.
Transition.
Yeah.
I guess they also have to be more operationally focused, whereas like founders are more sales focused.
Yeah.
So I guess that is quite a
yeah,
difference.
and I think it's like, I mean, I don't know the statistics. I imagine the majority of the founders remain CEOs for quite a while, but there obviously are instances as well where like founders just are removed or put into a different role and CEOs are hired into the company. And I imagine that must be incredibly hard to like let go of the baby that you've built to give over the reins to someone else.
It's kind of like I guess when a child turns 18 and you got to send them
out
off,
to the world.
and you have that empty nest syndrome.
That's interesting though, right? Because like I think it's like classic thing you hear in the VC community of like, you need to hire people with like great traits, but you have to accept that they come with great efficiencies because of that as well.
Yeah.
Right? And
that's
probably why they don't make that jump.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like, okay, to what extent do CEOs or founders need to be better at strategy? I don't know. I think CEOs probably need to be better at strategy than founders. Founders just like need to survive and just like do a lot of pushing before they gain momentum, where actually it's a lot, I don't know if it's easier, but it's a lot different building a company once there's a lot of pull from like customers, investors, or any sort of direction. But in the initial stages where you just like need to push and just like push on potential customers or like figure out how to actually create a product and get to product market fit, very different skill set.
Yeah, definitely.
So what sort of companies do you think would be most attractive for seed investors? Or let's say if we had to nail it down to like 3 key factors that investors might be looking at that stage, what would you say?
In terms of founders or companies?
In terms of investors pouring money into like a startup.
Yeah, so I guess like any fund at the end of the day is a business like any other, with the premise that for funds there is a need to return the fund to LPs, just because otherwise you can't raise your next fund. And so obviously everyone wants to like keep building their funds and keep investing for a very long time. So in terms of investments, investing in companies that have the potential to be big enough to actually return the capital that is invested into them, and hopefully be outliers and be even bigger to return more capital for all the companies that don't make it. It's a very difficult assessment to make at seed though, when there is zero data to go on. So I think every later round it's a lot easier because you get to back the founders based on the promise and the vision that they want to achieve, plus everything that they've done with their money to date.
And it becomes more like, can you crank the handle?
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, let's look at some of the data and like how you've done, how you've managed that capital, and what hires you've made, and how much progress you've made on product. Whereas at seed, it really is just like, okay, we're like a group of smart people, and we think this is what the world should look like.
Do you think sort of like this professionalization almost of this entrepreneurship path, right, is sort of almost diluting the value of entrepreneurship? or do you think it's actually like helpful for the ecosystem to have all these people from different backgrounds that may have not thought of that before?
As in, do you mean professional, like the fact that you can now study entrepreneurship?
Yeah, exactly. And like you have all these like programs from Entrepreneur First to Y Combinator.
Yeah.
Right? And just bringing people who are different, obviously, but maybe have a different mindset, right?
Yeah. I think it's great for the ecosystem. I think it's great for the ecosystem, and I also think it's great for individuals. I can't speak to entrepreneurship courses, and that's probably the one where I'm less convinced or sold on. But I think if you look at like talent investors in general, most people that join the program won't build successful companies, but I think they still get so much out of the journey and the process. It just teaches you life skills that are almost impossible to gain in any other way if you don't force yourself to like try to bring something about from nothing. So I think the majority of the people I imagine still value their EF experience or similar programs.
It's a value above beyond just the companies they start.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that like sets you up for a lot of different opportunities post that. And I think it also builds a lot of self-awareness. And I think just thinking about like founders and teams in general, the best thing that people can focus on is building self-awareness. As in, the minute that you know what you're good at and what you're bad at means that you can make better decisions or outsource the decisions or skills that you're not good at to someone else and know how to build your teams and how to hire. And I think unless you like put yourselves in those circumstances, it's very difficult to build self-awareness.
Okay, so it's like a muscle you need to practice.
Yeah.
Or just go to therapy or something.
Well, actually that leads to a good question on sort of how do you keep your mental state calm and stable throughout your career. How have you done that? How have you taken care of your mental well-being?
Me or
you personally? And then like maybe founders that you've experienced. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think my career has been particularly difficult, and I feel like I've been incredibly fortunate, and I've not. I don't think there's anything in particular that I do. I saw in the list of questions you guys spoke about meditation. It's one of those things that has been on my list for so long to pursue, and I genuinely believe in the benefits of meditation, but I just haven't gotten around to pursuing it. So I mean, okay, what do? I do maintain a work-life balance. I exercise, I sleep, I eat well. I do like all the standard things. The basics. Yeah. And it's for me personally, it's definitely enough. Like I think maintaining social connections outside of work and friendships and just like, okay, the biggest thing is making sure that your personality isn't built around one single thing. Because if it is and that thing falls away, it's actually, I think a lot of people then can have an identity crisis. And so I think in terms of like my life, it has so many varied components.
So like the fun, you're diversified.
Yeah, exactly. It has so many different components that like even when something is taken away, I don't have a sense where I've lost my identity.
Yeah.
So, and I guess like COVID is a great example. Like I did a lot of dance that obviously like was moved to the side of COVID, as in dance schools, clubs, etc. closed. I couldn't dance else anymore.
Yeah.
But like because it's like one of the a lot of components to my life, it's like okay for me to then still feel like I am me, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And I think it's like if you pour everything into one thing, whether it's like a corporate career or a founder or whatever, and that thing falls apart, then that's hard.
That's trouble.
That's when
I think that's really valuable advice.
Yeah, it is.
Because you have all these people, whether it's like a relationship or like you're a sports athlete or whatever, working really hard, right?
Yeah.
And it's sort of like you're all in almost, right?
Yeah.
You have nothing else to really base yourself on.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Don't put your identity in one thing or one person or one.
Yeah, diversification.
There you go.
Variety.
But if you're working like 80 hours a week, it's kind of hard to do that though, right? And I think that's the trap almost.
Maybe for a time, like founders have to do that. But no one said being a founder was healthy in the beginning.
That is true. I mean, if you want to do
it's
things,
like you have these extreme athletes. It's not healthy, but you make
those people are not healthy.
You choose to make the sacrifice. If you want to excel in one area, I believe you have to be obsessed with one thing, and it's not healthy, and you have to accept that. Yeah. Like for example, like those bodybuilders doing all the steroids, they know it's not healthy, but they're happy doing it because they've chosen that path
to pursue it.
But
on like fundamental health actually, and this ties back to like coaching. Whether it's therapy or coaching, and the two are different in that therapy is backward looking and like unpicks all the things that have shaped you into who you are today, and coaching is totally forward looking. But I think the amazing thing about coaching is that it's non-directive opportunities for growth, and I think most founders don't really have that at the moment, because everyone in a founder's life is trying to influence them, whether it's investors or mentors or employees or advisors, and everyone's like, oh, you should do this, you should do that. And I actually think taking time out and pursuing coaching is the best thing that a founder can do for their growth and mental health.
So I guess, like, not to get too deep, but what are some questions that you should ask yourself, right? Whether you're a founder or just in life in general, to really reflect.
But should ask yourself before pursuing founding, or should ask yourself
in general, right? Like, I guess as a pulse check.
Whether you're doing okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you guys ask yourself?
Maybe for founders. Or
Maybe for founders.
Maybe for maybe for founder, like, I don't know where to go with that.
I mean, it's such a hard question.
Yeah.
What would you say? What would your answer be?
Well,
to that
you
question?
mentioned like self-awareness is super important, right?
Yeah.
And there's the questions like, all right, like, how do you be self-aware, right? So if you're not self-aware, well, it's kind of like hard to start that training, right?
Yeah.
And I guess, is there like a framework or structure that you see people go through, right? Or founders you work with to say, hey, like, actually I ask myself, oh, like, this is the structure I needed to really start that path in that journey.
Yeah.
So let's chat about women in business. I think today there are more and more women who are like getting more successful and getting to the top in like male-dominated spheres and business as well. Do you think that we require a different sort of skill set to reach the top than males, or it's more or less the same?
I think we probably require slightly different skill sets actually. Mostly because skill sets are perceived a little bit differently, and there's been so many studies in terms of, I don't know, how women's behavior comes across, and the whole labels of like bossy versus confident, etc., etc. So I think there is a requirement for more skill sets, but I think the only thing that will allow more women to progress is actually change in organizational structures. So everyone always talks about like bias and a bias training to make sure that during interview processes or promotions there isn't any bias, but it's actually a lost cause in the sense that as human beings, I don't think we can rewire our brains to not have any bias. So the only thing that we can do, and I think more businesses are now doing, is implementing internal structures to actually give everyone a fair advantage in terms of advancement. And I think whether it comes to like recruitment and hiring or promotions, that's the best way to do it, because you can't count on people to not be biased.
Yeah, fair enough. Do you feel like we need to sacrifice more to actually get through, or is more or less equal as well?
I think relatively equal. Yeah. It's really hard for me to say. So I've worked in relatively male-dominated industries in terms of tech and VC and funding, but I've never actually felt the disparity between any of my male colleagues or myself. Mm-hmm. And the only moment where I actually it really hit me was during the pandemic, where all of a sudden, because you see yourself on a screen as well on Zoom, that was the first time when I realized that actually I'm like hanging out with so many men. Because when you're in a room, like I never really thought about it, because you don't see yourself and you don't see the contrast.
And then you see you're the only one.
Yeah, and then you see it on like a Zoom gallery view and you're like, wow, where are all the women? Yeah. So that's like the first time where it really, I think it really hit me.
Yeah. To all the ladies who are watching us now, what would be your advices to be successful as you are? Because you made it to the list of 30under30, which is quite an achievement.
I mean, I feel so incredibly fortunate because I've always been part of very supportive teams, and honestly, it's such an interesting topic to talk about, the gender imbalance in general, because I've never felt like I couldn't do stuff because I'm a woman, and I don't know whether I've just been incredibly fortunate by joining really supportive organizations, groups where I felt like I had the exact same opportunities. But in terms of advice, I actually think the best way is to seek out groups that are supportive and open, and I think there is now a lot more recognition for, I think women are perceived as offering a lot more of the soft skills sometimes in terms of communication, empathy, a lot of stuff that is actually incredibly important for both people management and leadership, and actually joining organizations that recognize that and value that.
So surround yourself with the right environment.
But I feel like, I really feel like the tech industry is changing so much, and actually a lot of our startups as well are very focused on diversity and inclusion, and are actually doing a lot to promote diversity and inclusion in a way that maybe wasn't really talked about as much 10 years ago or so.
Mm-hmm. Going back to Forbes 30 under 30, what did you feel when you actually understood that you made it to the list? What was your first reaction?
I mean, I feel like that is such a fluke, so I don't talk about it. I don't talk about it a lot. What I feel, honestly, the fact that it was a fluke, as in I feel like those lists are actually so random in that if you're really to select 30 people, even in Europe, as in out of like millions of individuals, I don't know if it's a relatively representative scale of achievement, but it was actually really funny because so at least my journey, I was nominated by an ex-colleague of mine and I had to like opt in to actually even be considered. So I did do that. But then like they don't tell you that you've made the list. And so I remember waking up to like all these messages of like friends and colleagues being like, oh my God, congrats. And I was like, oh, I've not actually even seen it. Yeah, so that was like quite unexpected.
Wow, that's really exciting. Do you have any female role model who inspires you?
Female role models.
Or maybe just someone who like made a big influence on you during your early years or now?
Yeah. I mean, okay, so I don't, it's my genuine answer, and I know that it's actually a lot of people's go-to answer, but I would honestly have to say my mum. Like, she's just so incredibly independent and driven, and I think maybe that's why I don't actually have that many insights in terms of like women leaders or women in business, because I think the way I was brought up was that gender divides really, really don't matter, and there is no like difference in terms of your abilities or what you can achieve, etc. So I mean, yeah, I hope it's not a cop out, but I would probably have to say her. It's like a role model and inspiration.
That's amazing. Is there anything else you want to suggest, or any advices that you can give to yourself like 10 years back from what you know now and your experience now? To the younger sort of girls.
Yeah. Okay, best advice. And this is, I think, for both genders, so not necessarily just women, but like surround yourself with people that you want to be like. I think in terms of all the studies, it's actually very difficult to achieve stuff if the people that you're surrounded by are doing something totally different. Yeah. And so in terms of like habit building and achievements, just like pick the groups that you aspire to be part of, because that's the only way to actually become those individuals. And so I think that would be my advice for like, regardless of what you want to pursue, whether you want to like pursue sports or I don't know, or business or science or whatever it might be, just like hang out with people that have achieved all the things that you want to achieve, because inevitably with time you will become them as well. But yeah, maybe that advice applies to even more so like women that want to be part of structures where they don't currently see themselves being part of at the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I also heard that you are like the order of 5 people who surround you, so it's sort of like the mix of that, so that actually makes sense.
And it's actually, honestly, it's so important. I've definitely experienced it as part of like my life career, but I think it really, really matters who you surround yourself with in terms of your own aspirations, goals, achievements, etc.
What do you do outside of your work? What are your hobbies? Like, it seems like you're working all the time because you achieve so many things.
God, no! I honestly, I'm such a big proponent of work-life balance. Yeah. Okay, hobbies. I mean, I socialize a lot with my friends, so I love hanging out with friends and I don't know, hosting dinner parties, cooking, etc. Yeah. I do a lot of Cuban salsa. Like, I love to dance, and I think that's, to be honest, like in terms of reflecting on the past year, the saddest thing about the pandemic, at least for me, was like lack of exposure to people that aren't like me. As in, I'd get on Zoom calls and everyone I speak to is like another version of me with like a similar education level, similar income, similar worldviews, etc. And that's the bit that I miss the most, which I think I got a lot of from my hobbies that I pursue. I read. I wanted to learn to play poker, but like obviously like that has been postponed. Cycle, run. I don't know, like a mix of everything. I think I'm like so open to new experiences and challenges.
You mentioned that you read. What would be your like book suggestion, or the favorite book? Maybe top 3, whatever it is.
Top 3. So because like I saw that question on one of the prompts, and so okay, it's a book that has been spoken about so much. But if I'm being super honest, in terms of like the books that have changed my life the most in the past couple of years, it will have to be Why We Sleep. in terms of like day-to-day behaviors. And maybe this just reflects really badly on me, how like I just didn't prioritize sleep at all. But in terms of daily habits, it really has impacted me a lot. And I know it's like almost a meme in the startup world where everyone talks about it, but I think that would be my top recommendation from like the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think we forgot with this crazy type of how important sleep is actually.
Yeah. Honestly, it's spoken about a lot now, so I know that I'm going with the wave. But if there's one book recommendation, it'd be why we sleep, I think.